Now that the subsidy regime is over, the federal government says there is no looking back. However, there are several ways by which the new administration wants to start cushioning the effect of subsidy removal. And that one of them is by sharing 8,000 naira to 12 million households for the next 6 months, with $800 million palliative borrowed from the World Bank, approved by Nigeria Senate through President Bola Tinubu's request. Welcome to Standpoint. I am Precious Amayo. Now we're staying on that $800 million loan. The Senate during the week approved President Bola Tinubu's request for $800 million borrowing from the World Bank. The president's request was in a letter read by the president of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, at plenary on Thursday. The president explained that the Federal Executive Council, led by former President Muhammadu Buhari, had approved an additional loan facility to the tune of $800 million to be secured from the World Bank to finance the Social Safety Net program. Now, attached with that particular request was a decision by the federal government to transfer the sum of 8,000 naira monthly to 12 million poor and low-income households for 6 months. He said the money would be transferred directly to identified beneficiary accounts. The spokesman for the president, Mr. Dele Alaki, said the government would distribute free grains and fertilizers to poor households and subsistence farmers, while large-scale farmers will get them for a discount as part of immediate measures to curb the impact of scrapping the subsidy. But questions many Nigerians are asking is, how will the federal government determine who is poor? How verifiable is the data for poor persons? And they are also hoping this wouldn't be another trader money by the former administration, which had no effect on the poverty ravaging the country. But let's look at this with an analyst. Joining me, to talk about this is Johnson Chukwu. He is the CEO of Cowrie Asset Management. Thanks for joining us on Political Standpoint.
Thank you for having me. Good day.
So let me start from that question that many Nigerians are asking, which is how realistic is the 8,000 naira to 12 million households, and what impact will it have?
Okay, in fact, when you talk of how realistic it is and the impact 8,000 per household we have to bear in mind that this is going to be going to the most vulnerable. So you are looking at people whose income is quite low. In as much as it's not going to be an enduring, going to have an enduring impact, certainly for those the most vulnerable, it will be some relief. That's certainly not enduring, because if you look at the amount, you're saying 8,000 per month for a household of 5. In 6 months, they're going to be getting about 48,000 naira. And that means that each member of the household will be getting something like 9,600 naira a month for the 6 months. Which amounts to about 1,600 naira a month. So in effect, what each individual is getting, if you're talking a household of 5, is that in a month they're getting 1,600 naira. So yes, if you look at it, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look quite impressive. But like I said, it's going to the most vulnerable. You're talking about people who have no income or no income, little income or no income. So like they say, any little thing is better for nothing. Something is better than nothing. But clearly for me, the key direction that we should be focusing on is, how do we create an economy that is productive, that will allow everybody who is able-bodied, who is willing to work, to get a job. And that those people who are working are productive, not people who are rent seekers, not people who are just sitting there living on public treasury. People who really are sweating it out and creating value. That's the way a good economy works. So ultimately, what will happen is that if we have a productive economy, people with any income, at periods like this, their relief will come from salary increment, because they are producing goods and services that are valuable. Then in terms of the integrity of the list of beneficiaries, I think what the federal government needs to do is make the list very transparent. Build a list that is built right from districts to local governments to states, and have that uploaded on a website that every Nigerian can log in and see. So that way, you can actually validate those lists by checking people that are listed around your neighborhood. Are they people you know? Are they really human beings? And are they really poor? And then once you have that, So once you have that, the issue of whether how we're going to identify the poor people won't be a problem, because if you're going to build it from districts, so in that case, you could actually say in each ward, where are the most vulnerable, poorest people? Let the ward leaders or the political leaders in that ward compile that list. Of course.
All right, thanks for staying with us on Standpoint. We are back with the CEO of Cowrie Asset Management Limited, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, was speaking about the $800 million loan request from the president. It started before, from the previous administration, and now it's more of a carryover. And that's what we're talking about. And the items that have been listed, in terms of what this money is going to be used for. Mr. Johnson Chukwu was speaking as to the realistic nature of 8,000 naira for 12 million households every month. But I also want to ask you, when you look at that figure, and we know that this, is we'll say the most vulnerable. But, in terms of the figure that, we've seen being reported by international organizations as to 150 million people living on that poverty line, 120 million. The list is about 70 million. And then when you look at 12 million households as against that particular report or those figures, where does it stand?
Well, if you look at, depending on what parameter you're using to measure poverty, there is a figure from World Poverty Clock that said about 93 million people are living in abject poverty. But remember, this intention is to touch 60 million people. So if you touch 60 million out of 93 million or thereabouts, of course, there's also a projection that another 7 million will go into poverty because of the increase in fuel price and the harmonization exchange rate. So if you even take it as you're going to have about 94 million people that are going to poverty and are in extreme poverty in the country, then 60 million of them will affect about 2/3 of that population. Clearly, even the amount we are talking of will not assuage the impact of poverty on these people. Like I said earlier, you're talking about just about 1,600 naira a month per individual. As a measure of poverty is that your expenditure will not be less than $1.9 a day. $1.9 today, taking an average of $2 per day in Nigeria, is a dollar is about 750 naira. So $2 will be something like 1,500 naira. So in effect, what each individual will be getting in a month is what is required to be consumed by individual in a day to be considered not extremely poor. Which is why I say the impact is not going to be as huge, but anything is better than nothing. So other measure of poverty, which came from the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, said about 1.3 million people are living in multi-dimensional poverty, that they lack access to good water system, good medical care, good educational system, and a multiplicity of parameters that we have mentioned. I'm not sure that is what we want to deal with when we're talking about palliatives for the most vulnerable. Clearly, this is targeted at the so-called 93 or 94 million people that have been classified by World Poverty Clock as extremely poor. And they require a minimum of $2 or $1.9 a day. But we will be giving them just about $1.9 in a month. So that will tell you the contrast in terms of impact. But what matters to me is at this point that we must evolve an economic system that will be productive and will allow people to get gainfully employed and create value so that their income will be aligned with the performance of the economy. Because if you are productive and you are producing goods and services that are of quality, probably for export, for local consumption, when price levels change, which is the impact of this fuel subsidy removal, your employer is likely going to adjust your remuneration to be in tandem with the cost of living increase.
But what about the idea of interventions, other kind of interventions that could complement this particular move? Because some people are saying, look, what if after 6 months, what next? Are you going to continue, which might not be sustainable? So what other interventions could accompany this particular palliative to ensure that, look, it is some sort of complementary, and then it could, if you stop giving the 8,000 naira, there are other things that they could fall back on.
Okay, let me take us back to some of the measures they were supposed to have been put in place before the removal of subsidy. The removal of subsidy was supposed to have happened sometime last year, not now. I think January last year or December 2 years ago. But the current president, or December last year, the president decided in his wisdom, the immediate past president, to extend it against the dictates of the Petroleum Industry Act. some of the things they had actually planned to put in place was that they're going to buy buses, which are gas fueled or gas-driven buses, and they will provide at least 20 buses per state. So they had planned to bring in about 1,000 buses, provide 20 per state, which is about 720 buses, and that make sure that the state capitals had enough of these buses, that each state will have a minimum of 20. And then states, based on their population density, will have, some states may have more, like Lagos, maybe Port Harcourt, and what have you. They may have more of those buses. That was supposed to apply routes that were largely inhabited by the most vulnerable in the society. Places like in Lagos, places like Ajegunle, Agege, and all those routes. So that impact of that would have been that the cost of transportation to and from work would have remained largely the same for this set of people. One of the reasons why England seems to be a desirable place for most people to go and live in is because they have one of the most efficient public transport systems. So a part of the measures that can be put in place going forward is to improve the public transport system and to some extent use it as an insulator to the public when it comes to the most vulnerable, when it comes to the cost of transportation. And cost of transportation is a very critical cost when it comes to household expenditure in the country. So that's one aspect that should have been done and can still be done. The other thing is that they were supposed to provide CNG, corporate natural gas, so that each state will have access to this corporate natural gas. And they were making efforts to convert vehicles from gasoline-driven to gas-driven. And I think we can still do those things. If, for instance, you begin to convert public transport vehicles or passenger vehicles to gas-driven source of energy, you will end up reducing the consumption of fuel and reduce the impact of the price adjustment we are witnessing on fuel prices. Remember that we are not seeing the end of it. Today, Brent is doing more than $81 per barrel. So the implication and subsequent importation of fuel will land at a cost that is higher than the current pump price. And so we should expect that there will be further adjustment in pump prices. But if we adopt these two measures I mentioned, improve public transport system, provide public transport vehicles like you have in other countries in the world, since we don't have the rail system, and ensure that vehicles have easy access to converting from fuel to gas-driven.
And management and monitoring will become another issue, because I don't know how well, apart from Lagos State, those other state governors and governments have done in terms of managing a public transport system. Some have tried and failed. So we'll see how they manage this particular one if it is done. But I wanted to ask you about what is one of the things, or one of that item on that list that Nigerians have been talking about, and that's the 70 billion naira earmarked for the National Assembly, those new lawmakers, for, to create a conducive work atmosphere for them. And, people are wondering how for a system that right now we're saying we don't have enough money. Why should we have 70 billion naira for the National Assembly? I wanted to speak on that because, the mathematics for a lot of people is some people have left. Some people are coming in. New people are coming in. So that if they're working or work items or work tools they have used, they should be handed over. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
Okay, my take is that it depends on the priorities of the government. The comfort of the political class has always been a priority in the Indian system. So it's all about what is the priority of the leadership in terms of resource allocation. Clearly, by allocating more than 20% of the amount that we disbursed as palliative to those in political offices, particularly elected National Assembly members, remember they are just about 460 of them, or 470 of them that are elected in the National Assembly. You have 360 members in the House of Representatives and about 109. So if you add the two of them up, you're going to have something like 469 members of the National Assembly. They'll be getting 70 billion, whereas the population of 60 million people will get 500 million. So if you do that arithmetic, then they're getting more than 15% of what the rest of the world is getting, or the rest of the poor is getting. So the key question is that the priorities of the government, who are the priorities in terms of resource allocation? We've always cried ourselves hawks on the fact that the National Assembly members or the political class are getting disproportionate share of the national resources compared to what the masses are going through. Like I did mention the issue of buses. I'm sure with 70 billion naira, you will get those buses for about the more than 1,000 buses that I referred to. And that will be a lot of relief. And if you have that relief, even National Assembly members will be more comfortable moving around. And I don't think the expenditure they're talking about buying computers, furnishing their offices requires that volume of disbursement, of volume of support or cash. I think, but for me, the key thing we must bear in mind that there's a priority of the government. It's the priority of the leadership of the country, and they are allocating resources to those they think are more important to them. And that's the only way you can explain that.
But if we were to stimulate our economy, what should we let go and what should we be doing?
Well, if we to stimulate the economy, the key thing for me is that the resources of the state should be invested in some critical sectors of the economy. Some of the heavy lifting have been done, removing subsidy, harmonizing the exchange rate. We need to address the issue of insecurity. It is very critical because I can tell you that the agricultural sector employs more than a quarter of Nigerian population. If the farmers can go to the farms, they, to some extent, will be insulated from the poverty impact of fuel subsidy removal. If they can produce and you have enough food production in the country, price of food will come down, food inflation will come down from about 24% today. And if that happens, it will take off part of the pressure Nigerians are going to go through as a result of increased inflation. Second aspect is that the government needs to focus on infrastructural development. Transport infrastructure is very key, road infrastructure, rail infrastructure. If we need the logistic infrastructure, the seaports, we need to make the economy an attractive economy for productive activities. We need to improve power supply, particularly transmission grid, which is at the purview of the federal government because the federal government still controls the transmission grid. We need to do that so that we can wheel out the power that's generated and make sure that we have stable power supply in the country. If we are going to have that, you will gradually make the country more productive. The ultimate objective of the government should be to make Nigeria a productive economy so that people can be gainfully employed. And then before we look at other issues that about the quality of education, the quality of skills that people acquire from the educational system, that will make them to be as productive as people elsewhere in the world. So for me, the government must invest in key priorities, infrastructure, security, and you can't go wrong with those things. Those are part of the pressures that are holding the economy down from being productive.
And some people are saying, look, we need to cut the cost of governance. But what impact will that make? And how much can we really save if we're going to cut the cost of governance?
Well, you did ask me earlier about the 70 billion that's going to National Assembly member. That's part of the cost of governance. I think beyond the National Assembly member, there's also vehement allocations to the judiciary and other arms of government. So those are the parts of the issue about governance. The other aspect is the multiplicity of ministries and departments. In as much as I agree that we need to whittle down and harmonize the functions of these ministries and departments, I don't really, if I take a look at what has happened in the past couple of years, I don't think that's our greatest problem. The greatest problem is that we are misallocating resources to non-critical sectors of the economy or sectors that are not relevant to economic growth. There's not much you can get from harmonizing the ministries and departments. There will be some savings, but that's not the problem. The problem is that the National Assembly, you don't need to harmonize or use them to a unicameral National Assembly from a bicameral National Assembly to avoid the 70 billion that is going to them. The 70 billion is an intentional allocation. And I'm sure that without it, they would have still survived. I guess that they have enough allocation for each of the members of the National Assembly to take care of their offices. Remember that under Obasanjo's government, we had eliminated some of the perks of offices in terms of benefits in kind, like buying vehicles, putting them in houses. But today, we have seemed to have gone full cycle, gone back to those areas. I saw that there are some members of the National Assembly will be getting bulletproof vehicles. And then some of them are going to stay in government accommodations. These are things that should have been fully monetized. And that way, people will now determine whether that's the best way to spend their money. And I think we need to go back to that. We had rules that said, look, we're monetizing all benefits of public officials. But we have gone full cycle and say, look, some people at certain levels will continue to enjoy the effects of
Absolutely.
offices. And you really can't put your hands on the man.
Perhaps, a good place to start. Nigerians just want food on the table. This government has said it is ready to put food on the table. We'll see the steps they will take in the coming days. Thank you so much for talking to us, Mr. Johnson Chukwu, CEO, Cowrie Asset Management Limited.
My pleasure.